Yes. The $8 million for operating support, would that be for all three states, Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas?
Yes, is my understanding.
That would be the incremental amount that would have to be shared
Okay.
by some combination of the three states.
I'm a little confused between alternates 1 and 2. Basically, if I wanted to go from Kansas City to Oklahoma City, it looks like either one would meet the needs. What's the difference between a continuous service between the two and just Kansas City to Newton and then Newton to Oklahoma City?
Why don't I ask Mike
Yeah,
to address that?
alternative one
Mike,
extends.
actually, why don't you step up here and,
Alternative one extends the existing Heartland Flyer. For those of you who don't know what the Heartland Flyer is, it is a current operation, Amtrak operation between Fort Worth and Oklahoma City. Alternative one extends that particular train up to Newton, where it makes connections with the Southwest Chief, another Amtrak train. Alternative two extends the existing Heartland Flyer all the way to Kansas City. Does that answer your question?
Okay, let's say I was going from Chicago to Oklahoma City, which would, I mean, does one involve changing passenger cars? I mean, if I got on.
No, one assumes a transfer from one train to another, so you would get off the Heartland
Right.
Flyer
Okay.
onto another train.
But the other does not involve changing from one train to another.
Well, alternative two would take you into Kansas City, and you would get off the train there and make connections with whatever you wanted to, over to Missouri or wherever. Okay?
When you say this is the beginning step, how far out would it possibly be before trains started going between the cities?
well, I think it's hard to answer that question. I mean, what we know, based upon the current schedule, is it taking about 3 years just to get train sets in place. And clearly, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, I think, by policymakers to determine how we move forward. As I said, we'd have to determine of these 4 alternatives, which is the desired alternative for Kansas, and I think that's going to require a public process. We need, voices in Kansas to weigh in on that decision. Then we need to ensure that we've got the support of Oklahoma and Texas. We'll have to develop our service development plan, which is much more detailed information in terms of how you lay out the service, and then we'd have to line up the funding, and that certainly is not going to be an easy feat.
Beyond the subsidy, how much of the startup cost would be state responsibility, and how much of that would be Amtrak, federal, or some combination?
Mike, I'll give an answer, and then I'll watch you, and you can weigh in to straighten me out. How about that? Currently, there are some federal dollars through the Federal Railroad Administration this year, $2.5 billion, and we could be an applicant for some of those dollars. So it would be possible to get some federal funds, but I think it would be clear to say that Amtrak would not fund the capital cost or the upfront cost. And I think just looking at the numbers, it's certain that there would be some portion of that capital upfront cost that would likely have to be borne by the state. And if you look at other places, unless something significant changes, the state would be responsible for the yearly operating subsidy.
Amtrak would own the rolling stock, though. They would purchase that, or how would that work?
That's a good question, Mike. I guess I don't know the answer.
The rolling stock issue is to be determined. We have included costs in here for new rolling stock. In some cases, the states own equipment on current services that we operate around the country. In other cases, Amtrak provides the equipment. It is unknown what the timing would be of implementing this service. So whether Amtrak would be the provider at that time or the state procures its own equipment is yet unknown. But the costs are included.
You might as well stay up here,
Yeah.
Mike. I can tell this
I had a
question's for
question
you.
for him, but, I mean, does this ridership, these ridership estimates, I mean, how do they compare with, would Amtrak say these are pretty solid ridership estimates, this is worth pursuing, or is it on the bubble, or what?
These are not only attractive ridership levels, but we think it's very, very positive. We quite frankly didn't initially think the numbers would be quite this high, but we use an outside firm, so there's no bias here. We use an outside firm by the name of AECOM, who does forecasting studies all over the world. And they have, we have great faith in them. They've done a lot of studies for us in other states. The results of implementation of those services that they forecast have been pretty much on the money. So we stand by this report and AECOM's work. But they're nice numbers, they're attractive numbers, and we believe they'll be achieved.
Can you compare them with, say, another route that you have?
That is very difficult to do because every route has different population bases. The population centers are separated by different distances. You have demand that varies from one market to another. So simply to say that these numbers are compared to something in Pennsylvania or in Wisconsin is not a fair comparison. But they're on their own merit, it's attractive.
Yesterday when the House, sorry.
I was gonna say, Senator Reich had a question, and I wanted to get to him first.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Secretary. I ride Amtrak all the time, and I'm very familiar with the Southwest Chief, and I'm also familiar with the enthusiasm for the people wanting to have this type of service. This train will get into Newton in the dead of night, and the people from Chicago will be wanting to have, sleepers on that train and those things. You're surely thinking about those things too, instead of a train coming in, letting a car off or stopping for a while, people getting off in the dead of night, going someplace else, and then going on down to Dallas. Dallas is a big, a big area, where a lot of people were coming from Chicago to Dallas. So that type of thing has to be in your thinking with regards to, I know this is all ahead of time, but you ought to put that into your remarks regarding what the potential seems to be for that, because I think that traffic is going to be solid, and you may have a chair car and you may have a sleeper on that train that just cuts off and picks up with the Northern Flyer and goes south. And if that's the case, that ought to be mentioned in some of these releases that talks about those potentials, because people will buy into that.
I totally agree. There are other options, certainly. You could run a through train potentially all the way through. What we were asked to do here was at the request of the Kansas DOT. We looked at a number of alternatives, both as far as the route length as well as the type of service, and it was mutually decided we would start with this as a base.
I wholeheartedly agree, and I certainly applaud you for it.
Whether sleepers are desired later, it's just more cost.
Right.
A question over here?
Yesterday during the House debate of the rail program, one of the questions came up, are these gonna be slow-moving trains? We don't wanna be on a train that's only gonna go 20, 30, 40 miles an hour through Kansas. We want the highest technology. We want, I don't know if they want bullet trains or they want the Acalas on the west and east coast, but can you give us an idea of what the train's gonna be moving like?
Well, the trip times are in the handout material, I believe.
They are 79.
The top speed is 79 miles an hour based on the current signaling system and federal requirements for signals. Obviously, the train doesn't average that because of station stops, and the speed is not 79 the entire way. There's some restrictions here and there. Looking at a build out of, say, 110 mile per hour or 220 is a whole new ballgame. You have to remember, we're operating with mixed traffic territory, where freight trains are running at speeds of 50, 55, or 40 miles an hour. To try to superimpose the much higher speed trains, the 110, the 220, requires a whole different thinking and build out of infrastructure. This is an incremental approach. There are some speed improvements in here that have been built into the model. All of the routes and alternatives were modeled on a computer with what is called an RTC model to determine what the fluidity of the territory would be and how much capacity enhancement would be needed to assure a 100% on-time performance of these passenger trains. That's what it's based on, but it is conventional, what we call conventional speed.
If you were to go to that 110, 220, you'd almost have to have a dedicated line so there's no other traffic on it.
That is correct, and I'm afraid we'd be standing here 20 years from now talking about it because of environmental concerns and other issues that prolong those kind of developments.